The first scream didn't come from a man, it came from a horse. A sharp, panicked cry that split the air, followed by the thunder of hooves scattering in every direction. Jace Calder was already moving before the echo faded. He'd been leaning against the rail outside the freight office, hat tipped low, when the sound hit him like a jolt of lightning. By the time his boots hit the dirt, he'd spotted the source: 6 riders tearing down Main Street, faces wrapped in black scarves, rifles flashing in the late afternoon sun. They weren't here for money. They were here for him. The leader, a weary man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, was called Varric Sloan, a name whispered in mining camps and cattle towns like a curse. Sloan's crew had been shadowing Jace for 3 days, ever since the incident at Red Hollow. No one in Dry Mesa knew what had happened out there, but Jace did. And so did Sloan. The air was thick with grit, the wind carrying the smell of hot iron and dry sage. Jace's hand found the grip of his custom Schofield revolver, black steel, pearl inlay, a weapon as much a part of him as the scar on his own knuckles. A shot rang out, shattering the glass of the telegraph office. Townsfolk dove for cover, doors slammed, and the street became a canyon of dust and danger. Jace didn't run. He stepped into the open, eyes locked on Sloan. "You should have stayed in Red Hollow," Sloan called, his voice carrying over the chaos. Jace's reply was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a blade. "You should have buried me when you had the chance." The next moment was a blur: gunfire, shouts, the metallic tang of blood in the air. Jace moved with a precision born of too many close calls, each shot deliberate, each step calculated. He wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting to end something that had been chasing him for years. By the time the dust settled, Sloan lay in the street, his scarf torn away, eyes wide in disbelief. The rest of his crew had scattered into the desert, leaving only silence and the slow creak of a swinging saloon sign. Jace holstered his revolver, the weight of it grounding him. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain from far off in the hills. It was over. For now. The silence after the gunfire was almost worse than the fight itself. Dust hung in the air like smoke, curling in the dying light. Somewhere, a shutter creaked. Somewhere else, a dog barked once, then went quiet. Jace Calder stood in the middle of Main Street, boots planted, chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate breaths. His revolver was still warm in his hand, the smell of burnt powder clinging to the steel. Varric Sloan lay sprawled in the dirt 10 paces away, his black scarf half buried in the dust. The scar that cut across his face caught the last sliver of sunlight, a pale slash against weathered skin. His eyes were open, but they saw nothing now. The rest of Sloan's riders had vanished into the desert, leaving only the churned-up tracks of their horses and the faint echo of retreating hoof beats. Jace holstered his Schofield, the motion slow, deliberate. His fingers brushed the pearl inlay, a reminder of the man who'd given it to him, and the promise he'd made that day. He turned his head slightly, scanning the street. Faces began to appear in the windows, cautious, pale, and wide-eyed. A few doors cracked open. The people of Dry Mesa were used to trouble, but this had been something else. From the saloon, a tall, weary man stepped out, wiping his hands on a bar rag. It was Ezra Pike, the saloon keeper, his eyes sharp under the brim of his hat. "You just bought yourself a heap of trouble, Calder," he said, voice low but carrying. Jace didn't answer right away. He walked toward Sloan's body, each step crunching in the grit. He crouched, studying the dead man's face for a long moment. There was no satisfaction in it, only a grim certainty. "He was trouble the moment he rode into town," Jace said finally, his voice quiet but edged with steel. Ezra's gaze flicked to the horizon, where the desert stretched out in endless waves of gold and shadow. "Men like Sloan don't ride alone. You know that." Jace straightened, his eyes following Ezra's. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of rain from far off in the hills, and something else. A feeling, the kind that crawled under your skin and stayed there. He'd been hunted before. He knew what came next. A soft sound drew his attention, the scuff of boots on wood. A young woman stood on the boardwalk outside the general store, clutching a bundle of cloth to her chest. Her eyes were fixed on him, wide and unblinking. "Is it over?" she asked. Jace met her gaze for a moment, then shook his head. "Not yet." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and certain. He turned and began walking toward the livery stable. His horse, a rangy, dark bay named Bramble, was waiting, ears flicking at the sound of his approach. Jace ran a hand down the animal's neck, feeling the steady thrum of muscle beneath the hide. He didn't know how long he had before Sloane's allies came looking. Hours, maybe. A day if he was lucky. But they would come. And when they did, Dry Mesa would be caught in the middle. He tightened the cinch on Bramble's saddle, his mind already working through the possibilities. He could ride out now, draw them away from the town. Or he could stay, dig in, and finish this on his own terms. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Jace Calder had been running for too long. It was time to stand. The rain never came. The scent of it lingered in the air, teasing the town. But the clouds broke apart over the hills and left Dry Mesa under the same hard, unblinking sun. By morning, Sloane's body was gone. No one claimed to have moved it, but Jace knew better. Men like Sloane didn't get buried by strangers. They were taken by their own, carried off into the desert where the wind could whisper over their bones. Jace was in the livery, oiling the Schofield, when Ezra Pike stepped in. The saloon keeper's boots were dusty, his shirt damp with sweat. He didn't waste time on greetings. They were seen at the North Ridge, Ezra said. For riders, maybe more behind them. They're not coming to talk. Jace kept working the cloth over the revolver's barrel, slow and steady. How long? An hour, maybe less. The words settled between them like a dropped stone. Jace slid the revolver into its holster and stood. Get the women and kids into the freight office. It's the only building with thick enough walls to hold if they start shooting. Ezra hesitated. And you? I'll be where they can see me. The street was quiet when Jace stepped out. The townsfolk moved quickly, ducking into doorways, pulling shutters closed. The sound of boots on wood faded until only the wind remained. He stood in the center of Main Street, hat brim low, hands loose at his sides. The heat pressed down on him, the kind that made the air shimmer above the dirt. Then came the sound, faint at first, then growing. Hoof beats, many of them. They appeared at the far end of the street, a dark knot of riders against the pale horizon. Dust rose behind them like a storm. At their head was a woman, tall, lean, with a long coat that flared behind her like a shadow. Her hair was the color of rusted copper, her eyes hidden behind smoked glass spectacles. Jace knew her name before she spoke it. Mara Sloane, Varric's sister. She reined in her horse 20 paces from him, the others fanning out behind her. You killed my blood, she said, her voice carrying like a blade through the heat. He came for me. Jace replied. I didn't give him anything he wasn't asking for. Mara tilted her head, studying him. You think this ends with you walking away? Jace's gaze didn't waver. I think it ends with you riding out of here alive. If you're smart. A ripple of laughter moved through her riders. Low, mean. Mara didn't smile. You've got one chance, Calder. Drop the gun, and maybe I'll let you crawl out of here. Jace's hand hovered near the Schofield, but he didn't draw. Not yet. You've got one chance too. Turn around, and I won't have to put you in the ground next to your brother. The street went still. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then Mara's hand twitched. The first shot cracked the air, Jace dove sideways, rolling into the cover of a water trough as bullets chewed into the boards behind him. The sound was deafening, the sharp bark of revolvers, the deeper boom of a shotgun. Splinters stung his face, and the trough shuddered under the impact of lead. He popped up, fired twice, dropped one of the riders from his saddle. The man hit the dirt hard, his rifle skittering away. Mara's voice cut through the chaos. Flank him. 2 riders broke off, circling toward the livery. Jace sprinted for the saloon, boots pounding, dust exploding under each step. He slid through the swinging doors, the dim interior a sudden relief from the glare outside. Ezra was there, shotgun in hand. They're coming around back. Jace grabbed a second revolver from behind the bar, an old Colt, heavy but reliable. Keep them off the freight office, he said. No matter what. The fight spilled through the town like wildfire. Gunfire echoed off the buildings, glass shattered, and the air filled with the acrid sting of powder smoke. Jace moved like a shadow, slipping from cover to cover, every shot deliberate. One by one, The riders fell, but Mara kept coming. She was fast, faster than her brother had been, and she fought with a cold precision. That made her dangerous. Twice, Jace felt bullets pass close enough to tug at his coat. Finally, they faced each other in the open street, the last of her riders down or fled. The sun was low now, painting the dust in gold and blood red. Mara's spectacles were gone, her copper hair tangled, her eyes burning with fury. "You could have walked away," she said. "So could you," Jace replied. They drew at the same time. 2 shots. One impact. Mara staggered, her revolver slipping from her hand. She looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her gaze, then crumpled into the dust. The street was silent again. Jace stood there, chest heaving, the weight of the day pressing down on him. He knew this wasn't the end. Men like the Sloanes always had more shadows waiting in the wings. But for now, Dry Mesa was safe, and Jace Calder was still standing. The sun was gone, but the heat still clung to the town like a fever. Dry Mesa's main street lay quiet under a bruised purple sky, the dust settling in lazy spirals where the day's violence had churned it up. Jace Calder sat on the edge of the boardwalk outside Ezra Pike's saloon, elbows on his knees, hat tipped forward to shadow his eyes. The Schofield rested in his lap, cleaned and oiled, but still smelling faintly of the fight. Inside, the low murmur of voices drifted through the open door, townsfolk speaking in hushed tones, their words carrying the weight of both gratitude and unease. They'd seen him stand against the Sloanes. They'd seen him win. But victory didn't erase the fact that trouble had followed him here. Ezra stepped out, a glass of water in one hand. He passed it to Jace without a word. Jace drank, the coolness cutting through the grit in his throat. "How many left town?" he asked. 3 families, Ezra said. "Packed up before sundown. Said they didn't want to be here when the rest of the Sloanes come calling." Jace's jaw tightened. "They're not wrong." Ezra leaned against the post, eyes scanning the darkening street. "You think she was the last?" "No." Jace's voice was flat. "Mara was just the one they sent to make it personal. Someone else is pulling the strings." Later, when the saloon had gone quiet and the lamps burned low, Jace walked the length of Main Street alone. The night air was cooler now, carrying the scent of mesquite and the faint metallic tang of the day's blood. He stopped at the freight office. Through the window, he could see the women and children who'd taken shelter there. Some asleep on bedrolls, others sitting awake, eyes wide in the dim light. He gave a small nod to the man standing guard at the door, then moved on Dot at the far end of town. He paused. The desert stretched out before him, an ocean of shadow under the moonlight. Somewhere out there, beyond the ridges and dry washes, men were making plans. He could almost feel their eyes on him. Back at the livery, brambles shifted in his stall, ears flicking. Jace ran a hand down the horse's neck, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath the hide. "We're not done yet, boy," he murmured. A sound made him freeze, faint, deliberate. Coming from the alley behind the stable, he drew the Schofield in one smooth motion. Stepping into the shadows, a figure stood there, half hidden in the dark. Not a Sloane. Taller, leaner, dressed in a long coat that caught the moonlight. The man's face was obscured by the brim of his hat, but his voice was low and steady. "You've made yourself a problem, Calder." Jace didn't lower the gun. "You planning to fix it?" The man's smile was a pale slash in the dark. "Not tonight, but soon." And then he was gone, melting into the shadows as if he'd never been there. Jace stood there for a long moment, the night pressing in around him. The Sloanes had been dangerous, but this was something else entirely. He holstered the revolver and looked out toward the desert. The wind had picked up again, carrying with it the dry whisper of sand over stone. Somewhere out there, the next fight was already on its way, and Jace Calder would be ready. The desert at night was a different kind of dangerous. By day, it was all glare and heat, the sun burning the world into sharp edges. But under the moon, it became something else, a place of whispers and shifting shapes, where every shadow might be a man with a rifle, and every gust of wind might be the breath of something watching. Jace Calder rode Bramble along a narrow wash, the horse's hooves muffled in the sand. The moon was high, silvering the ridges and painting the sagebrush in ghost light. Somewhere behind him, Dry Mesa slept, or tried to. He wasn't riding away from the fight. He was riding toward it. The man in the alley, the one who'd spoken like he already owned the outcome, hadn't been a Sloan. That meant someone else had been pulling the strings all along. And Jace had learned the hard way that if you waited for trouble to come to you, it always brought friends. By dawn, he'd reached the edge of the Black Mesa Flats, a stretch of cracked earth and scattered rock where the wind never seemed to stop. He dismounted, crouching low to study the ground. Tracks, fresh, not just horses, wagons too, heavy ones. He followed them for an hour before the smell hit him. Wood smoke, faint but steady. Jace crept up a low rise and froze. Below, in a shallow basin, a camp sprawled across the flats. 2 wagons, a dozen horses, and at least 15 men. Some were cooking over a fire, others cleaning rifles. And at the center, leaning over a map spread across a crate, was the man from the alley. Even in daylight, his face was shadowed by the brim of his hat. But Jace could see the way the others deferred to him, the way they leaned in when he spoke, the way they moved when he gestured. This wasn't just a gang. It was an army in the making. Jace slid back down the rise, heart steady, but mind racing. He couldn't take them all head on, not yet. But he could learn. And learning meant getting closer. He circled wide, keeping low, until he was near the edge of the camp. From here, he could hear snatches of conversation. Dry Mesa first, then the rail spur. Calder won't see it coming. Orders from the Hollow. The Hollow. The name hit him like a hammer. Red Hollow, the place he'd left behind in smoke and blood. The place where this had all started. A sudden crunch of gravel behind him made him spin. Schofield in hand. A young man stood there, barely 20, holding a rifle that shook in his grip. His eyes were wide, but not with fear, with recognition. "You're him," the boy whispered. "You're Calder." Jace didn't lower the gun. "And you are?" The boy swallowed hard. "Name's Eli. I was in Red Hollow. I saw what they did. I've been waiting for someone to come after them." Jace studied him for a long moment. The kid's hands trembled, but there was something in his eyes, a stubbornness, a refusal to look away. "You wanted to help?" Jace asked. Eli nodded once. "I wanted to finish it." They moved before the sun was high, skirting the camp, marking positions, counting rifles. Jace's mind worked like clockwork, every detail stored, every weakness noted. By the time they rode away, the plan was already forming. It wouldn't be clean. It wouldn't be easy. But it would end this. As the desert wind rose behind them, carrying the smell of dust and distant rain, Jace felt something he hadn't in a long time. Not hope. Not yet. Purpose. The desert wind was sharp that morning, carrying fine grit that stung the eyes and coated the tongue. Jace Calder crouched behind a jagged outcrop of basalt, the Black Mesa Flats stretching out before him like a cracked, sun-bleached map. Beside him, Eli shifted his weight, the boy's knuckles white around the stock of his rifle. Below, the enemy camp was waking. Men moved between the wagons, their voices low, their movements purposeful. The man from the alley, the one who'd spoken like he already owned the outcome, stood at the center, issuing orders with clipped gestures. Jace's eyes tracked every detail. The 2 sentries posted on the ridge to the east, the cookfire smoke drifting toward the west, masking scent and sound, the way the horses were tethered too close together, a weakness waiting to be exploited. He leaned toward Eli, voice barely above a whisper. "We don't take them all at once. We break them apart, confuse them, make them fight shadows." Eli nodded, swallowing hard. "And if they see us?" "They won't, not until it's too late." They moved as the sun climbed, keeping low, circling wide to the west where the ground dipped into a shallow arroyo. The air was heavy with the smell of sage and dust, the silence broken only by the distant clink of metal from the camp. Jace's plan was simple in theory, dangerous in execution. Spook the horses, scatter them into the flats, cut down the sentries before they could regroup, use the chaos to take the leader alive or dead if it came to it. The first step came easy. Eli crawled to within 20 yards of the tether line, a small pouch of dried mesquite pods in his hand. He tossed them into the dust near the horses' hooves, the sharp scent making the animals snort and shift. Then he let out a low, sharp whistle, a sound like a rattler's warning. The reaction was instant. The horses reared, eyes rolling, and bolted against their tethers. The ropes snapped, and in seconds the camp was a storm of hooves and shouts. Jace was already moving. He came up behind the first sentry, the Schofield's barrel cracking against the man's skull before he could turn. The second spun at the sound, rifle half raised, and dropped as Ellie's shot rang out. Clean and precise, the camp dissolved into chaos. Men scrambled for weapons, shouting over each other, firing at shapes that weren't there. Jace moved through the smoke and dust like a shadow, each shot deliberate, each step calculated. He saw the leader, tall, lean, coat flaring as he turned, and closed the distance. The man drew fast, but Jace was faster. Their shots came almost as one, the air between them burning with the heat of lead. Jace's bullet took the man in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. The revolver clattered to the ground. Jace was on him in 2 strides, boot pinning the man's wrist. "Who's giving the orders?" Jace demanded. The man's smile was slow, blood at the corner of his mouth. "You already know, Red Hollow," Jace said. The man's eyes flickered, just enough to confirm it. By the time the dust settled, the camp was broken. The survivors fled into the flats, leaving their wagons, rifles, and wounded behind. Eli stood near the ridge, chest heaving, eyes wide with the shock of having survived. Jace holstered the Schofield and looked out toward the horizon. The fight here was done, but the war, the one that had started in Red Hollow, was still waiting. He turned to Eli. "You ride with me now. We've finished this together." The boy nodded, and for the first time, Jace saw something in his eyes that wasn't fear. The road to Red Hollow was a scar across the desert, a pale, winding track that cut through dry washes and jagged ridges, leading into a basin where the land seemed to hold its breath. Jace Calder rode at the head, Bramble's ears flicking at every sound. Behind him, Eli kept pace, his young face set in a grim mask. The boy had barely spoken since they'd broken the camp at Black Mesa. Jace didn't press him. Some silences were better left unbroken until the time was right. By midday, the air grew heavier, the heat pressing down like a hand. The horizon shimmered, and the first dark smudge of Red Hollow appeared. A cluster of buildings huddled in the basin's center, their outlines warped by the heat haze. Even from a distance, Jace could feel it. The place was wrong. They reached the outskirts as the sun dipped low, shadows stretching long across the cracked earth. The wind carried the faint smell of charred wood and something older. Deeper, the scent of a wound that had never healed. Ellie's voice was quiet. "It's just like I remember." Jace dismounted, boots crunching in the dust. The buildings were half-burned, their walls blackened and warped. Doors hung from broken hinges. Windows gaped like empty eyes. He walked the main street slowly, each step stirring memories he'd tried to bury. The saloon gutted. The general store, shelves collapsed, counters overturned. And at the far end, the sheriff's office, its sign hanging by a single nail. It had been here. The day the hollow burned, the memory came unbidden. Smoke thick in the air, choking the lungs. Gunfire echoing off the walls. Men in long coats moving through the streets like a tide, their faces hidden, their rifles spitting fire. Jace had been younger then, quicker but less careful. He'd been hired to escort a shipment of gold through the hollow, gold that never made it out. The attack had been sudden, brutal, and precise. By the time the shooting stopped, half the town was dead. The rest scattered to the wind. And in the chaos, Jace had seen him, the man from the alley, standing at the center of it all, giving orders with the same calm authority he'd seen in the desert camp. Back in the present, Eli was watching him. "You could have left that day. Why didn't you?" Jace's gaze stayed on the sheriff's office. "Because someone had to get the survivors out. And because I owed a debt." "To who?" Jace didn't answer. "Not yet." They made camp in the shell of the old livery. The roof half collapsed, but enough to keep the wind off. Jace sat with his back to the wall, cleaning the Schofield by lamplight. Eli dozed nearby, the boy's rifle within arm's reach. The night was quiet, too quiet. No coyotes, no wind through the sage. Just stillness. Then, from the street outside, came the sound of boots on wood. Slow, deliberate. Jace was on his feet in an instant, revolver in hand. A shadow moved past the doorway, tall and lean. The voice that followed was calm, almost polite. "You came back. I was hoping you would." The man stepped into the lamplight, and Jace saw him clearly for the first time, the same face from the alley, from the day the hollow burned. Older now, but the eyes were the same, cold, calculating, and certain. "Name's Corvin Hale," the man said, "and you've been walking in my shadow for far too long." The lamplight flickered in the ruined livery, throwing long, jagged shadows across the warped boards. Corvin Hale stood just inside the doorway, the desert night at his back, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud. Jace Calder didn't move. The Schofield was steady in his hand, but his eyes were locked on Hale's, cold meeting cold. Eli stirred from his bedroll, blinking at the sight of the stranger. "Who?" "Stay down," Jace said, his voice low but sharp. Hale's gaze flicked to the boy, then back to Jace. "You've picked up a stray. That's new. You used to ride alone." "I still do," Jace replied. Hale stepped forward, boots whispering over the dust. "You've been chasing ghosts, Calder. But the truth is, you've been chasing me. Ever since Red Hollow." The name hung in the air like a gunshot. Jace's jaw tightened. "You burned that town to the ground." Hale's smile was thin. "I did what needed doing. The gold was never meant to leave the hollow. You were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. You killed people who had nothing to do with it. They were in the way." The words were so casual, so devoid of weight, that Ellie's breath caught. The boy's hands clenched around his rifle, but Jace's slight shake of the head kept him still. Hale's tone shifted, almost conversational. "You've been carrying that guilt like a badge. But here's the truth. You didn't save them all because you couldn't, and deep down, you know you'd make the same choice again." Jace's grip on the Schofield didn't waver, but something in his eyes hardened. "You're wrong. Am I?" Hale tilted his head. "You could have walked away from Dry Mesa, but you stayed. You stayed because you wanted this. You wanted me to come for you." The silence stretched, taut as a drawn bowstring. Outside, the wind rattled a loose shutter. Then Hale's hand twitched toward his coat. The world narrowed to a heartbeat. Jace fired once. The shot cracked through the livery, the echo rolling out into the empty street. Hale staggered, his coat flaring as he fell to one knee, a dark bloom spreading across his side. But he didn't drop his gun. He smiled, a slow, knowing curve of the lips. "This isn't over, Calder. You've just stepped into something bigger than you can see." And with a sudden, desperate burst of movement, he hurled himself backward through the doorway. Vanishing into the night, Jace was at the threshold in seconds, but the street was empty. Only the wind moved, carrying the faint sound of hoof beats, fading into the dark. Eli came up beside him, eyes wide. "We could go after him." Jace shook his head. "No, he's leading us somewhere, and I need to know where before I follow." He looked out into the desert, the moonlight silvering the ridges. Somewhere out there, Corvin Hale was bleeding, but not beaten. And Jace Calder knew the next time they met, one of them wouldn't walk away. Dawn broke over the desert in thin, pale streaks, the kind of light that didn't warm so much as expose. Jace Calder rode with his hat brim low, eyes fixed on the faint trail of hoofprints leading away from Red Hollow. Eli followed close, his young face drawn tight with determination. Neither had spoken since leaving the ruins. The prints were erratic at first. Hale had been wounded, his horse weaving, but as the hours passed, the trail straightened. He was heading somewhere with purpose. By midday, the land began to change. The open flats gave way to jagged outcrops and narrow canyons, the kind of country where a man could disappear for weeks without a trace. The wind funneled through the stone, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke and something else, the metallic tang of worked iron. Jace slowed Bramble to a walk. "We're close," he murmured. They came to a rise overlooking a hidden basin. Below, nestled between the cliffs, sprawled a settlement that wasn't on any map. Rough wooden buildings leaned against each other like conspirators, their walls patched with scavenged planks and sheet metal. A blacksmith's forge belched smoke at one end, while at the other, a corral held a restless knot of horses. But it was the people that caught Jace's eye. Dozens of them armed, watchful, moving with the easy confidence of those who knew they were beyond the reach of law. Ellie's voice was barely a whisper. "What is this place?" Jace's gaze stayed on the basin. "A hole in the world. A place for men like Hale to gather and plan." They watched for an hour, memorizing the rhythms. Guards rotated every 20 minutes. A wagon loaded with crates rolled in from the north trail. At the center of it all, near a long, low building with a tin roof, stood Corvin Hale, his coat clean now, his wound bound, his voice carrying as he spoke to a half-circle of men. Jace's jaw tightened. He's not hiding. He's recruiting. Eli shifted. We can't take all of them, no, Jace said. But we can take the heart out of it. The plan took shape in the dirt at their feet. Wait until nightfall, when the forge's glow would blind the guards to the shadows beyond. Slip into the corral. Cut the horses loose. Chaos first. Questions later. Use the confusion to get to Hale. It was simple, dangerous, and it had to work. Night came slow, the basin sinking into shadow while the forge's fire painted the air in flickering orange. The clang of hammer on steel masked their approach as Jace and Eli slid down the slope. Keeping low, the corral was easy enough. A quick slice of the rope, a sharp clap, and the horses exploded into motion. Hooves thundering through the camp. Shouts erupted, men stumbling into each other as they tried to corral the stampede. Jace moved like water through the chaos, Eli at his back. They slipped between buildings, past a card game overturned in panic, past a man spilling a pot of stew into the dirt. Then they saw him, Hale, standing in the doorway of the tin-roofed building, barking orders, his revolver drawn. Jace didn't hesitate. He closed the distance in a dozen strides, the Schofield coming up. Hale saw him at the last second, his eyes narrowing in recognition. You just don't quit, Hale said, voice almost admiring. Not until you're done breathing, Jace replied. They circled each other in the narrow space between buildings, the noise of the camp fading to a dull roar in Jace's ears. Every muscle was coiled, every nerve alive. Hale feinted left, drew right, but Jace was already moving. The first shot grazed Hale's arm, spinning him. The second took the gun from his hand, sending it clattering into the dirt. Eli appeared at the edge of the alley, rifle raised. End it. But Jace didn't fire, not yet. He stepped in, grabbed Hale by the coat, and slammed him against the wall. Who's above you? Jace demanded. Hale's smile was slow, blood at the corner of his mouth. You think I'm the top of the ladder, Calder. You haven't even seen the man holding it. A shout went up from the far side of the camp. Reinforcements pouring in from the north trail. Jace knew they had seconds, maybe less. He slammed Hale to the ground, bound his hands with a length of rope from his belt, and hauled him up. Move, Jace ordered. They fought their way out through the chaos, ducking between buildings, dodging wild-eyed horses, slipping into the shadows at the basin's edge. Bullets sparked off the rocks as they scrambled up the slope, Hale cursing with every step. By the time they reached the ridge, the camp was a boiling mass of confusion below. Jace shoved Hale ahead of him, Eli covering their rear. They didn't stop until the basin was a dark smudge behind them. The moon was high, the desert stretching out in silver and shadow. Eli glanced at their prisoner. What now? Jace looked at Hale, at the man who'd burned Red Hollow, who'd hunted him across the desert, and who now claimed to be just a piece of something larger. Now, Jace said, we make him talk, and somewhere deep inside, he knew that whatever Hale revealed would change the fight entirely. The night wind hissed through the jagged rocks, carrying the dry scent of sage and the faint rustle of something small moving in the dark. Jace Calder sat across from Corvin Hale, the outlaw's hands bound in front of him, a small campfire throwing restless light across their faces. Eli kept watch a few paces away, rifle across his knees, eyes flicking between the shadows and their prisoner. Hale looked almost comfortable despite the rope biting into his wrists. He sat with his back straight, his expression calm, as if this were a conversation between old acquaintances rather than enemies. You've gone to a lot of trouble to keep me breathing, Hale said, his voice low and even. Makes a man wonder if you're afraid of what happens when I'm gone. Jace didn't blink. I'm not afraid of you, Hale. I'm afraid of the man you work for. A faint smile tugged at Hale's mouth. Then you already know more than most. The fire popped, sending a spray of sparks into the night. Jace leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Red Hollow. You didn't burn it for gold. That was just the bait. So what was it really about? Hale's eyes glinted in the firelight. You think it was about one thing. It wasn't. It was about control. The hollow sat on a crossroads, trade routes, water rights, rail expansion. Whoever owned it could choke the life out of half the territory, and your boss wanted it empty. Jace said, not empty, Hale corrected. Cleansed, rebuilt in his image. A place where every coin, every bullet, every drop of water passes through his hands first. Eli shifted uncomfortably. Who is he? Hale's gaze slid to the boy, then back to Jace. You've heard the name. Everyone has. But most think he's just a story told to scare green lawmen and restless drifters. They call him the broker. The name landed heavy in the air. Jace had heard it, whispered in saloons, muttered in mining camps. A man who never showed his face, who traded in secrets and blood with equal ease. Hale's smile widened at Jace's silence. You've crossed him without even knowing it. And now you've got his attention. Jace's voice was steady. Where is he? Hale chuckled. If I told you, you'd be dead before you got within a mile. The broker doesn't live in one place. He moves, always ahead of the storm. But he's building something, Calder. Bigger than Red Hollow. Bigger than Dry Mesa. And you've just stepped into the middle of it. Jace studied him for a long moment, weighing the truth in his words. Then you're going to take me to him. Hale's smile faded. That's not how this works. The silence stretched, broken only by the wind. Then Jace stood, walked around the fire, and crouched beside Hale. His voice dropped to a whisper only the outlaw could hear. You've seen what I do to men who come for me. Imagine what I'll do to the man who sent them. For the first time, Hale's composure cracked. Just a flicker, but enough. There's a place, he said finally. 2 days' ride north, past the salt flats. An old mining town called Ashford. He's there now, but he won't be for long. Jace straightened, glancing at Eli. Get some rest. We ride at first light. Hale leaned back, eyes on the fire. You're making a mistake, Calder. You think you're hunting him, but he's already set the trap. Jace didn't answer. He knew Hale might be right, but he also knew there was no turning back. The broker was real. And now Jace had a name, a place, and a reason to see this through, no matter the cost. The salt flats shimmered under the midday sun, a blinding expanse of white that seemed to stretch forever. Jace Calder rode with his hat brim low, the heat pressing down like a physical weight. Eli followed close, his horse's flanks dark with sweat. Between them, tied to Bramble's pack line, rode Corvin Hale, wrists bound. Eyes narrowed against the glare. They had been riding since dawn. The horizon never seeming to get closer. The air was dry enough to crack lips and parch throats, and the only sound was the steady rhythm of hooves on salt-crusted earth. By late afternoon, the land began to change. The flats gave way to low, jagged hills, their shadows long and sharp in the dying light. And there, tucked into a narrow valley, lay Ashford. Ashford was a ghost town that refused to die. Once a thriving silver mining settlement, it had been abandoned when the veins ran dry. Now its buildings leaned like tired old men, their paint peeled to bare wood, their windows dark. But there was movement, subtle, deliberate. Figures in long coats patrolled the main street. A faint glow spilled from the windows of the largest building, a 2-story structure at the far end that had once been the miners' hall. That's where he is, Hale said, his voice rough from the ride. Jace didn't look at him. You'll point him out. Hale's smile was thin. You won't need me to. They waited until nightfall before moving in. The moon was a thin crescent, the sky scattered with cold stars. Jace and Eli left the horses tethered in a dry wash and led Hale on foot toward the edge of town. The air smelled of dust and old wood, with a faint undercurrent of oil and gunmetal. Somewhere, a door creaked. Somewhere else, a man laughed, low and humorless. They slipped into the shadow of a collapsed stable, watching the street. 2 guards stood outside the miners' hall, rifles slung, their eyes scanning the dark. Jace leaned close to Eli. We take them quiet. No shots unless we have to. Eli nodded, his jaw tight. They moved like ghosts. Jace came up behind the first guard, one hand clamping over the man's mouth, the other driving the butt of his Schofield into the base of his skull. The man crumpled without a sound. Eli took the second, a swift, silent strike with the stock of his rifle. The guard dropped, and they dragged both bodies into the shadows. Hale watched with something like amusement. Efficient, he murmured. Jace ignored him and sighed. The miners' hall smelled of stale smoke and whiskey. The main room was lit by a handful of oil lamps, their light pooling on rough tables where men sat hunched over cards and bottles. At the far end, on a raised platform where the foreman's desk had once stood, sat a man in a dark suit. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair silver at the temples. His face was unremarkable, the kind you could pass in the street and forget a moment later. But his eyes were sharp, assessing, and utterly without warmth. The broker. He didn't rise when Jace entered. He simply set down the glass in his hand and studied him. "Mr. Calder," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." The room went still. Every man at every table had stopped moving, their hands resting near their weapons. Jace kept his voice level. "You've been sending people after me, burning towns, killing anyone in your way. That ends tonight." The broker's smile was faint. "You think this is about you? You're a piece on the board, Calder. Useful, dangerous, but replaceable." He glanced at Hale. "And you brought me my stray." "How thoughtful." Jace's eyes narrowed. "He's not yours anymore." Hale's answering smile was slow, almost apologetic. "I never stopped being his." The betrayal hit like a hammer. Hale moved fast, faster than Jace expected, twisting out of his bindings with a hidden blade, shoving Eli hard enough to send him sprawling. In the same motion, he drew a pistol from somewhere under his coat and leveled it at Jace. The room erupted. Chairs scraped, boots pounded, hands went for guns. Jace dove sideways as the first shot cracked past his ear, rolling behind an overturned table. Eli scrambled to cover, firing once, the shot shattering a lamp and plunging half the room into shadow. The broker didn't move. He simply watched, his expression calm, as if this were all part of the plan. Jace came up firing, his shots deliberate, driving Hale back toward the platform. Men shouted, bullets tore splinters from the walls, the air thick with smoke and the acrid sting of powder. Eli took down one of the card players who'd gone for a shotgun, then ducked as another bullet punched through the table beside him. Jace closed the distance to Hale, their guns almost touching. Hale's grin was wild now, his eyes bright with the thrill of it. "You can't kill me, Calder," he said over the roar of the fight. "Not while he's watching." Jace's reply was a single, deafening shot. Hale staggered, his grin fading, and collapsed at the broker's feet. The room froze. The broker looked down at Hale's body, then back at Jace. "Interesting," he said softly. "You've just made yourself indispensable." And then, with a flick of his hand, every gun in the room came up, barrels glinting in the lamplight. Jace knew the next few seconds would decide everything. Time slowed. The broker's hand was still raised, but every man in the room had a finger on a trigger. Jace Calder kept his breathing steady, eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. Eli was crouched behind an overturned table to the right, his rifle braced against his shoulder. Gaze locked on Jace, Hale's body lay at the broker's feet, blood pooling dark between the floorboards. The smell of gunpowder from that single shot still lingered in the air. The broker's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You've done me a favor, Calder." Hale was loyal only to himself. "But your loyalty will be tested in other ways." The first shot came from the back of the room. Jace dove sideways, the bullet splintering the wooden post where his head had been a heartbeat earlier. Eli fired back, his shot dropping a man over a card table. Chaos erupted. Gunfire roared, glass shattered, oil lamps toppled and spilled fire across the floor. The room filled with smoke and the acrid sting of burning whiskey. Jace kicked over a chair, using it as cover as he returned fire. One man went down clutching his chest, another spun away with a cry. Ellie's rifle cracked again, the muzzle flash lighting his face in brief, fierce bursts. The broker didn't flinch. He stood on the platform, watching the fight as if it were a chess match he'd already won. Jace knew he couldn't let him slip away. He pushed forward, weaving between tables, firing in short, controlled bursts. A bullet grazed his arm, hot pain flaring, but he kept moving. Eli shouted over the din left side. Jace spun, dropping a man who had been lining up a shot on the boy. Then the fire spread. Flames licked up the legs of a table, catching on the whiskey-soaked floorboards. The heat surged, smoke thickening until the air burned in their lungs. Through the haze, Jace saw the broker step down from the platform, flanked by 2 men with shotguns. They moved toward a side door, using the chaos as cover. Jace fired, forcing them to duck. But it wasn't enough. The broker slipped through the doorway, vanishing into the night. "Eli, we're moving," Jace shouted. The boy vaulted the table, landing beside him. Together they fought toward the same side door, bullets snapping past their ears. Jace kicked the door open, and they spilled into a narrow alley choked with shadows. The cool night air hit them like a slap. Somewhere ahead, hoofbeats pounded. The broker was already on horseback. Jace and Eli sprinted for the wash where they'd left their own mounts. Behind them, the miners' hall roared with fire and gunfire, the glow painting the sky an angry orange. They reached Bramble and Ellie's Bay just as a shout went up from the street. Men were spilling out of the burning hall, weapons in hand. "Ride!" Jace barked. They swung into the saddles, spurring the horses hard. Hooves thundered over the packed dirt, the wind tearing at their coats. Shots rang out behind them, but the darkness and distance swallowed the danger. They didn't slow until Ashford was a smudge of fire on the horizon. Ellie's breathing was ragged, his eyes wide. "We almost had him." Jace's jaw was tight. "We'll get another chance. He's not done with us, and I'm not done with him." The desert stretched ahead, endless and silent. Somewhere out there, the broker was already planning his next move, and Jace Calder was ready to meet him head-on. The desert swallowed the sound of their flight. By the time Jace Calder and Eli reined in their horses, Ashford was nothing more than a faint orange glow on the horizon. The fire in the miners' hall still clawing at the night sky. They stopped. In a dry arroyo, the walls high enough to hide them from any pursuit. Bramble stood with his head low, sides heaving, while Ellie's Bay pawed at the sand. Restless from the run, Jace swung down from the saddle, every muscle aching. He checked the Schofield to rounds left and slid it back into its holster. Eli dismounted more slowly, his hands trembling as he loosened the cinch on his horse. "We almost had him," the boy said, voice tight. Jace didn't answer right away. He crouched, running a hand over the sandy ground, listening to the night. No hoof beats, no voices, just the whisper of wind through the sage. Finally, he said, "Almost doesn't count. The broker's still breathing, and that means he's still moving pieces we can't see." They made a small fire, low and smokeless. The heat was welcome, but the silence between them was heavier than the chill. Eli broke it first. "Hale was never going to help us, was he?" Jace shook his head. "Men like Hale don't change sides. They just change tactics." The boy stared into the flames. "So what now?" Jace said. "We find someone who knows the broker's network from the inside. Someone who's lived in his shadow and walked away." They didn't have to wait long. Near dawn, as the fire burned down to embers, a figure appeared at the edge of the arroyo, a woman tall and lean, with a long coat that brushed the tops of her boots. Her hair was black streaked with silver, her face weathered but sharp. She didn't reach for the rifle slung across her back. Instead, she raised one hand in greeting. "Name's Mara Vance," she said. "I heard the shooting in Ashford. Figured you'd be the ones who lit that fire." Jace's eyes narrowed. "And you are?" "Used to run messages for the broker," she said, "until I decided I liked breathing more than I liked his money." Eli glanced at Jace, but the older man's gaze stayed on Mara. "If you're here, you want something. I want him gone," she said simply. "And I know where he's going next." Jace's voice was flat. "Talk." Mara stepped closer, her boots crunching in the sand. "There's a rail shipment leaving from Copper Bend in 3 days. Not gold, information. Ledgers, contracts, names, everything he needs to lock down the territory. If you take that shipment, you cut his legs out from under him." The fire popped, sending a thin ribbon of smoke into the pale morning sky. Jace studied her for a long moment. "And what's in it for you?" Mara's smile was thin. "Let's just say I've got debts of my own to settle." Eli looked between them. "So we hit the train?" Jace's eyes stayed on Mara. "We hit the train." They broke camp as the sun rose, the desert stretching ahead in endless waves of gold and shadow. Somewhere beyond those ridges, the broker was already moving toward Copper Bend. Certain his plans were safe, Jace Calder intended to prove him wrong. The rails sang in the cold morning air. From their perch on a rocky bluff, Jace Calder, Eli, and Mara Vance watched the black locomotive cut across the desert like a bullet, its plume of smoke trailing into the pale sky. The sun was just cresting the eastern ridge, turning the steel rails into twin lines of fire. "That's our ride," Mara said, her voice low. Jace adjusted the cinch on Bramble's saddle. "We don't have long. Once it hits the canyon, we move." Ellie's hands were tight on his rifle. "And the broker's on board?" Mara nodded. "Front carriage, surrounded by his best men. The ledgers will be in the strong box beside him." The plan was simple in theory. Board the train in the narrowest stretch of the canyon. Cut the couplings to isolate the front. Cars. Take the broker alive, if possible. But Jace knew plans rarely survived the first shot. The train roared into the canyon, the sound bouncing off the walls like thunder. Jace spurred Bramble forward, hooves pounding the packed earth. Mara and Eli flanked him, their horses keeping pace. They hit the side of the train at full gallop. Jace grabbed the iron rung of a ladder, hauling himself up as the wind tore at his coat. Eli scrambled up behind him, Mara already moving toward the rear coupling. Bullets sparked off the metal as guards leaned out from the windows. Jace fired back, his shots precise, dropping one man, forcing another to duck. Inside, the train was a blur of narrow corridors and shouting men. Jace moved fast, using the rocking of the carriage to his advantage, slamming one guard into the wall, disarming another with a twist of the wrist. Eli covered him, his rifle barking in the confined space. They reached the front carriage just as Mara's signal came, a sharp metallic clank as the coupling released. The rear cars began to slow, the gap widening. Now it was just them, the broker, and a handful of his best. The broker was waiting. He sat at a table bolted to the floor, the strong box beside him, two men with shotguns at his back. His expression was calm, almost amused. "Calder," he said, as if greeting an old friend. "You've been persistent." Jace stepped inside, gun leveled. "It ends here." The broker's gaze flicked to Eli, then to Mara. "You've brought company." "That's new. Times change," Jace said. The first guard moved, too fast for talk. Jace's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him into the wall. Eli dropped the second with a clean shot to the leg. Now it was just the broker. He didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he leaned back, hands flat on the table. "If you kill me, Calder, you'll never know who's above me. And there is someone above me." Jace's jaw tightened. "I've heard that before, and it's always been true," the broker said. "You think you've been fighting me, but I'm just the gatekeeper." The train lurched, the whistle screaming as it hit a curve. Jace steadied himself, the Schofield unwavering. "You've burned towns, killed innocents. Whatever's above you, I'll find it. But you won't be there to see it." The broker's smile was faint. "Then you'll never see the whole board." Jace fired. The shot was deafening in the small space. The broker slumped forward, the smile still ghosting his lips. Mara was already at the strongbox, smashing the lock with the butt of her rifle. Inside were ledgers, maps, and a stack of sealed envelopes. She flipped one open, her eyes scanning the contents. "This isn't just his network," she said. "It's bigger. Names in every territory. Judges, sheriffs, rail barons." Eli looked at Jace. "What do we do with it?" Jace holstered the Schofield. "We burn the parts that can't be used against the innocent. The rest, we used to finish what we started." They rode away from the train hours later, the desert wind in their faces, the sun climbing high. Behind them, the locomotive sat silent on the tracks, its smoke dissipating into the endless sky. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the broker was gone, and the board had changed, for the first time in a long while. Jace Calder felt the weight on his shoulders shift, not lighter, but different, and somewhere out there, in the vast, unforgiving West, the next move was already waiting.